Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today on the podcast, we are coming to you from our home base. We are at Dolby headquarters in San Francisco. We're here today to talk with Glenn Stilwell about what goes into mixing Dolby Atmos for live sports. Glenn has won multiple Emmy Awards and has had a long career working in live sports, and he was one of the first people to embrace Dolby Atmos in his world. He is coming off of a really busy year. He just worked in Paris this summer on the Olympic Games, and he's been a mixer for Apple's Friday Night Baseball. So I was really curious to sit down with him and learn about his experience bringing immersive audio to your favorite sports programs. In preparing for this conversation, I kept hearing Glenn and his peers referred to as A1s. So I started with a really basic question. What is an A1?
In sports television, the A1 is the technician in charge of the audio from A to B. We handle all of the setup. We direct all of the mic placements. We do sound design. We're in charge of all the dynamics. We're in charge of a talented group of A2s who go out and do a lot of the dirty work, laying in the cables, and then we're in charge of the mix. We take direction from the director and the producer and talk to the tape department. And we also handle, in the US, we also handle all the comms. So every piece of communications equipment is also our responsibility.
You mean the communications equipment for the production team so that they can talk to, so that the control room can talk to the camera people?
Correct.
Wow.
And there's a lot to that.
No doubt. No doubt. So was this something, tell me about your background. Was this something that you dreamed of doing as a little boy? How did you end up getting into live production audio?
No, it's my story is one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. I was 18 years old working for my dad. We owned a ham radio store in Sacramento, and all of the local radio station engineers were ham radio operators. So they would come to the shop, and I was working there, and they said, you're a pretty bright kid. Would you want to be the backup radio engineer for the post-game radio show of the newly arrived Sacramento Kings in 1985? That first year, I didn't do a single thing except watch the guy who was doing the things and eat popcorn and drink soda in the KFBK suite. And then that person leaves, and then it becomes my job. And then somebody doing the game, the visit side of radio for the NBA in Sacramento, well, he leaves, and then that becomes my job. And then the home guy leaves, and then that becomes my job. And then at some point, somebody said, hey, you'd make a good A2. Would you like to work in television? Okay, sure. And then it became, oh, and you mix those radio shows too. Well, would you like to A1 a game? Okay. And again, one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and here I am.
And tell me a little bit about the A1 lifestyle. Are you guys all freelance, or are there staff A1 mixers, or how does it kind of work out that way?
Over the years, it's primarily been A1s are freelance in the sports creation world. COVID accelerated the centralized production model where the producer and the director and the A1 and the technical director, all those people that were normally in the truck now are in a centralized broadcast facility. And then a lot of people became full-time because they could work every day. They didn't have to travel. They didn't have to get from game to game to game. So slowly now there are more full-time A1s in the business.
Do A1s kind of tend to specialize in a particular sport, or are you guys jacks of all trades who kind of move around and do different kinds of live TV broadcasts?
The spectrum is wide. There's a lot of guys who specialize on just one show. The mixer of the LA Lakers has been the same mixer for the LA Lakers for a very long time, and that's where they stay, and that's what they do. Those of us who came up in the visitor show. So the visitor show, when they come to town to your team, Sacramento Kings, I would be the visit show mixer. And so I got a different production team every single game. So the show is a little bit different. It's a different voice. It's a different program. It's different. So you got really good at being a jack of all trades and fixing all sorts of different little things that were different within the production. Whereas the home show mixer was the same home show mixer and was doing the exact same thing over and over and over again for 10 years. And now there's guys on the road that just do hockey. There's guys that just do baseball. There's guys that just do soccer. So it varies.
And what have you kind of ended up specializing in?
Baseball now with Apple.
Mm-hmm.
But that's 6 months out of the year. So I'm doing soccer games and I'm doing football games and I'll be doing basketball games when basketball starts. So I won't be doing just baseball every week.
Just walk us through a typical day when you show up. How much prep work has been done in advance? How much you kind of have to figure out on the day? Like, just walk us through maybe for a baseball game, kind of what's typical.
At least for me, for my baseball, it's pretty much, I've already planned it out. I know where I'm going well in advance. I know my audio design of where the microphones are going to go. So I'll have that all mapped out. I have all the paperwork. So you have to make paperwork to hand to your A2s and say, this is where I want everything plugged in. With a modern mixing console, it's a file to load once you've built it once. If you're on the same console, you just recall the file. So that's easier. I mean, there's a lot more to do in the bigger shows. But if you're talking about a one-off soccer game where the only information you have is what day you're working and what time to show up, well, then you kind of have to be quick, and you only have 6 hours. Typically, from the time you show up until the time they say 3, 2, 1. There's a great saying in sports television, the puck drops at 7. Whether you're ready or not, the puck is going to drop at 7 o'clock.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're ready or not.
Yeah.
So you have to get all that work done and make the paperwork on the fly and get that all, figure out what production wants or what they can handle. I have to judge them. Say, okay, are you kind of new and you don't need more voices in your head? Therefore, I'm not going to give you more voices in your head to screw up. So, those days are fun.
And so, for a typical baseball game, kind of how many inputs are coming into your console? How many microphones have you guys placed, and where are they being placed, and kind of what are your inputs looking like?
One of the biggest differences between, let's say, music or post-production, making a movie, as sports mixers or live television mixers, we have a lot of ins and a lot of outs. I have a 64 fader console, and sometimes I have 128. I will fill 65 to 75% of them on my show. There are shows that are bigger that will fill 100% of layer 1. So we talk about effects for baseball. The two most important microphones in baseball are the left bat crack and the right bat crack. Everything else is just an add-on, just a special.
In terms of effects.
Correct. Yeah, it's the bat cracks that are the most important. But then you're going to have maybe a microphone on the umpire. You're going to have microphones for the first and third base pickoff.
Are those just like shotgun mics that are placed on the side and they're aimed at those positions? And is the umpire wearing a wireless or are they, okay.
For our show, the umpire will wear a wireless. The pick microphones typically are shotguns. If you're lucky, you might get some parabolas to get closer to the pickoff. And then when you're doing it in Dolby Atmos, then you have multiple sets of crowd. So you're going to have a low crowd, a high crowd, a upper crowd, a lower crowd. You're going to have multiple. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 4, 5. We have 6 pairs of stereo microphones for crowd, just for crowd.
You were talking about the 2 most important microphones in baseball being the bat cracks. I know that you've got a clip from Aaron Judge. You want to set this up for us?
Yeah. So this was our second to last game of Apple baseball season. It was Red Sox at Yankees. Big game. It's somewhere in the 7th inning. But it was a pivotal moment. Yankees were down. Bases are loaded. Aaron Judge comes to the plate and hits a grand slam to put them up. So the sound of the back crack is there. The excitement is there. The crowd goes wild. Judge rounding the bases. It was one of those rare, perfect baseball moments.
And you got it.
And I got it.
A 4-pitch walk to Soto, and they're loaded for Aaron Judge. They all rise. Chance of MVP raining down from the stands at Yankee Stadium. Judge cranks one, deep left field, a grand slam, and the Yankees have the lead.
Well, you teed up, one of my questions, which is you've been working obviously in 5.1 for live sports for a long time, and you made the jump to mixing Dolby Atmos for live sports. So, and obviously I guess the main difference between 5.1 and Atmos in this instance is really the overheads.
Correct.
So what's going into those overheads, and are those separate microphones that you wouldn't necessarily have set up before, or what are you putting up in there?
It all depends on the production and depends on time, because you're always fighting time. You want to have at least 4 decorrelated sources in the overheads. And decorrelation is maybe microphones that are completely separate, that's all they do. Or you could take existing microphones, bring them into the desk again, and decorrelate them from their original. So add a little delay to them. Add some delay. Now you have a decorrelated source. Because that's important downstream. So as far as putting in crowd and for the overheads, it's as simple as 4 more mono shotguns.
From a kind of a philosophical, creative standpoint, the point of that is really you want to give the home audience listening kind of the experience that they might have had if they were in the stadium on the day?
Correct. Yes. The idea is that the person watching is sitting at the 50-yard line halfway up in the stands. You can also do things that in Atmos world help Atmos is by taking, let's say, the PA announcer. You would normally not hear them from left and right. You might hear them from above you. So you take that source and you can put that into one of the overheads, which really makes a huge difference, especially in, distinguishing an Atmos mix from a stereo down mix or something like that.
Tell me a little bit about the space that we're in. We're at Dolby headquarters, and we're in the listening room right now. You've got a room across the hall where you actually teach. So tell me a little bit about the setup here and what you do in this space.
The listening room here we use when we have in-person classes. Lots of networks, when they make a jump or they have a new mixer that needs to be trained to mix in Dolby Atmos, they send the mixer here. We have sample content that we've collected over the years that we take them into our lab, and we let them remix a game from scratch, meaning we just bring in all the individual microphones and say, okay, here's all your microphones. You can mix it. We bring in the sounds. We record the director and the producer hot mics, and we put those in the back of the room and say, okay, here's your director, here's your producer. They're calling the show. We have the video. You can mix now the show to your liking, and then we print a copy of that they've made, and we bring it over here and we take a listen. And we tell them, okay, this is what it's going to sound like when it gets to the home. Because that's the big mystery about Atmos, and how does it get into my home? And we let them hear it. We actually encourage them to make a mix that sounds horrible in Atmos that they think is going to sound even more horrible in stereo. And we bring it into the lab and say, now listen to this. This is what it would have sounded like in stereo at home. And we haven't had a single one that has done it so badly that you actually notice in the down mix. So it's a great tool to let them mix and then bring them in here and let them listen and then take them back and say, okay, now mix it again, bring back here. And then they get an idea of, okay, what are best practices for this sport?
Right.
And it's really helpful. We also have a class that we teach on Zoom. It's an hour and a half, 90 minutes to 2 hours. And it's kind of like an overview of how to make an Atmos mix in a CalRec console. So we can take them and say, because these are the consoles you're going to see, here's how you would make a Dolby mix, and here's how you would monitor it.
Yeah.
And here's how you would check to make sure that your down mix is correct. So we teach that live via a little switcher and some cameras. And
the lab room across the hall where you do the teaching, this is kind of designed to sort of emulate what it's like to the environment on the live broadcast truck. So tell me a little bit about, like, I'm just fascinated by this project, by this process. I got a lot of questions for you about it, but like, tell me about what is it like on the truck? I presume, so you have to understand, like, I come out of the world of feature film and television mixing where you have a pristine, silent audio environment. You're able to listen to everything, hundreds of times in audition and fine tune before you put everything down. So I'm intrigued by the chaos that I think that you live under during a live broadcast. So tell me a little bit about what it's like on the truck and just kind of set that scene for us.
Well, you get into the truck, the space would be very small. Our lab is 10 by 10, and it's probably a truck would be less than 2/3 of that space typically
for you, because the rest of the real estate is taken up by the video guys.
Correct. Yeah. Video, all the production people, the tape room, the video controllers, all those are still in the truck. We're only this one little part of it in the back. It's going to be tight. The speaker placement is not always going to be pristine.
It's going to be wherever they could put them, right?
Yeah, because they're fighting space.
Yeah.
And then, of course, all the noise.
Because you're not acoustically isolated from the rest of the truck?
We are acoustically isolated a little bit. But, of course, you have all of the hardware that you walked into our lab, and even our fans that are going on, our encoders that are in the lab. You can hear them. You hear a lot of that, and probably more in a truck. You're going to hear the AC, because the AC is going to have to blow as hard as it can blow in a scorching summer in Northern California. And you also now have your mix, right? So that's what you're supposed to be doing. However, you're listening for cues and you're listening for direction from the front bench, which are in 2 additional speakers, and they're talking all the time. So now I have the director talking all the time. I have the producer talking all the time. I would be talking to my A2s on the comms. So now I have that additional conversation that has to happen when needed. I talk to the tape department to make sure that that I'm clear of them when they play something. There's also an associate director who's doing all the counts. So he's counting us to and from break. So that's another voice that I'm listening to. And it might be so cold in the room that I've opened up the outside door.
That is amazing. And you're also, I mean, I want to dig into something that you just said. You might have 60 or more % of your inputs covered by microphones coming in. Now, obviously, you can't monitor all of that content coming in. So how are you making decisions about what's actually going to get mixed and fed out through your feed?
You have to know the sport a little bit. I know when the pitcher's going to throw the ball. Therefore, that's when the bat crack microphone comes open. Audio follows video. Mm-hmm. So I know, or I try to know, sometimes they're too fast for me, to get the first base pickoff microphone, because I can kind of know when they're going to throw it over. I don't always get it. No one always gets it. So there, not only are there all those microphones as sources, but you have a music playback device, because I have to play music during highlight packages or going to break or coming back from break, advertising. I have the spot box, 2 spot boxes. So a spot box is it's actually a tape machine or an EVS machine that plays the wipe sound. So when you go to a replay, you hear a whoosh that goes from left to right. And then when they come back, it goes right to left. And that comes from a spot box. So that is a stereo source. A little trick of the trade. If you're doing it in 5.1, you can make it go in a circle. If you ask, I'll tell you how to do it. But you can make it go in a circle. But then you have another spot box that contains the capper, which is at the end of a quarter. There's a giant graphic and a big splash of video, and it has a lot of audio on it. Some shows still have sound that comes from the bug. So the bug box sound is where the score is. Yeah. Not a lot of shows have sound from the bug anymore, but some still do. And then you have 10 different tape machines. So those need to be tracked if they need to be tracked. If there's a package, a voiceover package that the announcer is going to talk about the highlight package, you are going to put some music with it, and you're going to have the NAT sounds that were on that package in real time. So they're playing the back crack from that game. And you have to mix all that together, and that's just another source.
And do you have a cue sheet? Do you know that this stuff is coming, or do you kind of have to be ready to go with at any time on any of this stuff?
Bigger shows have a cue sheet. Smaller shows do not. I have a cue sheet on my big show, and I use it to do the pre-taping, because that's very specific. Mm-hmm. We're going to start with the open. We're going to transition to an on-camera. We're going to go to a highlight package, come back to camera, go to another highlight package, go to break. I want the cue sheet for that.
Right.
Once a baseball game starts, I kind of know I know how a baseball game works. 3 outs, and we go to break.
That's the way it flows.
We wait 90 seconds, and we come back from break, and it just repeats itself over and over and over again.
What are some of the bigger, more complicated events that you've mixed for that stand out in your mind?
Baseball is definitely one of them. I mean, any big college basketball can be very big.
Yeah.
Football is pretty big. So any type of football is very big.
And when you meet somebody new, how do you explain to them what it is that you do? Or do you tell them any good stories about your experience?
Oh, gosh. A1ing is very hard. Honestly, A1ing is very hard in that if you poke your head into a truck during a game and you watch, nobody really wants that experience. You know, there's no big hurrahs. There's no big, like we said earlier, audio, if nobody knows what we do until we don't do it. and then we get in trouble. But working on big events, I like working on Olympics.
Tell me about Olympics. What have you worked on? What sports?
I've worked on every Olympic since 2008, with the exception of Sochi. I started out working in commentary control. You have 20 different countries that have rights to that particular sport. I think my first sport was water polo. So we set up commentary positions for 20 different rights holders at a water polo venue and rinse and repeat every day. So I've done that. I've done bobsled, skeleton, and luge. That's fun.
That must be fun to mic and mix.
Luckily, in commentary control, you don't have to do any of that. That's another department. Sure. There's so many different departments in the Olympics.
So commentary control, meaning that you're setting up the space for all of these individual language contributors to record and put their commentary on like a pool video that's going out?
It's the world feed video with that country's audio that leaves and goes back to their...
See, this is just fascinating. Something I never even thought about. Yeah. I learn something in my job every day.
Yeah. Now in Olympics, I work for NBC. I'm their senior audio guarantee. So my job is to kind of look after a certain set of venues. So I had this last Olympics, we had beach volleyball and we had basketball. We had diving.
So in that sense, it must be a little bit easier, or I'm presuming, because you can go in and do all your mic placement well in advance and have all that stuff ready to go before showtime, obviously, right?
Well, Olympics is an example of the big world feed. So the Olympic Broadcast Services, Nuno Duarte, in fact, is in charge of making all of those sound designs and those decisions. They then allow broadcasters to use their mix as the world feed. They also allow people like NBC to get certain mic splits. So NBC can take specific microphones and create their own mixes if they wish. So some sports get the full NBC treatment and other sports take the world feed.
Well, you brought it up before, but I want to dig in a little bit to Dolby Atmos and how that's kind of affecting your world. Tell me about your experience. What was the first time you heard Dolby Atmos? And what was your first reaction to it? Did you kind of say like, oh, I see some interesting possibilities for this?
It was way back, it might have been 2016 when they first started. They didn't have a process to make it.
We obviously had a feature film and episodic post-produced content process. Correct. But there was no at that point we didn't have a way to do it live.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. There was no process for a TV truck to do it. And so, working with Dolby and working at the Pac-12, we kind of did some experimentation and kind of came up with the process that we teach today. So I tell you, one of my great experiences with Atmos is from film, is just watching on something as easy as Netflix and a Atmos soundbar and watching Six Underground. I tell this story all the time. The first time I did that and I started that movie, and that first scene of the car chase, it scared the bejeebus out of my dog. My dog thought that something was coming into the house, from every direction. And then little things like putting the PA up in the overheads. That is a very useful tool if you're creating sports in Atmos, because it uses the precedence effect to take the PA announcer who is getting into every single effect microphone that you have on the field. There's no
getting away from them.
There's no getting away from them. But because of the precedence effect, if you put a direct feed of the PA announcer into an overhead speaker and you're listening in Atmos, you hear that more clearly than you would hear it coming in on the left corner kick microphone,
right,
off a shotgun microphone, and you hear it first. So the precedence affects your brain, basically cancels it out in your effect microphone. It's still there. If you listen to that,
interesting.
If you listen to that, it's still going to be there completely. But the perception that it's not there anymore is that precedence effect, as long as you hear it clearly and you hear it first.
Well, and I'm wondering too, just creatively, I'm sure that it makes your mixes just more articulate and clear, because you're getting the PA from the overhead, and whatever your live commentary is coming out of your center channel.
Correct.
Right? So you're able to create more space for those different elements to be intelligible.
Well, think of it this way. When you go from stereo, which is every piece of content that you're bringing into your mixing console is only leaving in 2 channels.
Right.
Then we went to 5.1. So now the same amount of content is coming in, and now it's leaving out of 5 channels plus the subwoofer. So now the room that you're listening in has opened up. The room, it feels bigger. Now imagine when you add 4 more speakers above you. Now the room really opens up. Depending on how a music is mixed in Atmos, you get more defined audio because the violin is not coming out of the same speaker as the cello. Same thing happens in live sports. Like if you can spread things out and get them away from the center channel, which is get it away from the money, because the money's in the middle. The room becomes bigger, it becomes more distinct. So it works the same way.
Tell me a little bit about the training program here. Who gets access to that? If there's an A1 out there that's interested in learning how to mix in Dolby Atmos, how do they engage the company about that?
There's 2 versions. There's an online version. And first, let me say, both of them are completely free. There's no charge. We don't charge you anything. There is a online that we schedule now about once a month, and we teach it via Zoom. We do 2 classes once a month. We do a 10 a.m. Pacific and a 1 p.m. Pacific. We block out 2 hours because sometimes we get lots of questions. Sometimes we don't. And we take you through start to finish of setting up that particular console. It takes you from, okay, I'm going to start completely blank. I'm going to here's my first step. Make 2 of these and make 1 of these. Okay, now make 9 of these. We have several cameras. We have the Julia Child shot where we can show them where to do it. We have a handheld camera. So when we take them through that process, we explain the precedence effect to them. We explain the decorrelation, because sometimes, the shows that they might be on that are being asked to do it might not have that many shotguns. There might not be 4 extra shotguns on the truck. So you might have to repurpose something else to get what you want. And then we give them some swag. You get some swag at the end. And there's a recording of it that'll last 30 days. So if you want to go back and watch it, you're certainly welcome to go back and watch it. For the network clients, all they have to do is request that their A1 gets trained. It's a 2-day in-person class here.
They come here to San Francisco. They sit with you, and they get put through it.
Yep, they go through it, and we teach them everything. Depending on we can show them even down to a specific console, whether they have a new console or an old console, what they're going to be using, and we can easily show them and let them actually mix something because of the content that we have. And then, like you said earlier, bring it over here, let them listen to it, try to screw it up.
What are some things that people get wrong about mixing in Atmos?
Same things they get wrong about mixing in 5.1.
Uh-huh.
There is a general rule of thumb. It's a guideline, not a rule, that at least for US-based clients, the money is in the middle. So that's where the announcer is, and that you should always place your front left and right should always be 6 to 10 dB under the center,
because you want the focus to be on the middle.
Yep. And then your LSRS should be 6 to 10 dB under the front left and right. And then your Atmos should be pretty much equal front to back, except for the specific spot sources like the PA. And then you probably make that at about the same level as the LSRS. So, and it all has to do a lot with the down mix and what happens to it after it leaves the truck. The truck does not create any metadata at all. Remember that between post and live, live is channel-based, where post is object-based.
Right.
We have no dynamic metadata when we render a file, because that's not what we're doing. We're sending 10 channels, 10 stems out to an encoder who is encoding it to a specific spec. And we actually need to know what that spec is, which has been a problem in the past.
That's where the actual the 5.1 or the stereo is being created at that stage. You're not making all those simultaneously on the truck and toggling back and forth and monitoring them.
No, on the truck you're making one mix. You're making a 514 mix. You are then listening to a down mix of the 514 to 5.1, which is one of the things we have to teach you in the older consoles, because the older consoles don't do it. And then we actually listen to the 5.1 down mix down to stereo, which the desk will do. But you have to make sure that the settings are correct, because if your down mix settings in your console from 5.1 to stereo are not the same as what the encoder is actually doing when it sends the metadata to your home, then you won't be listening to the same thing that the customer is listening to.
What's your process for taking an A1 who is obviously very familiar with 5.1 and getting them to work in Dolby Atmos? I know you touched on that a little bit, that you do that work here, but what's take me through kind of the steps, the process of getting them kind of over that hurdle into mixing in Atmos?
So if they have a standard standard CalRec mixing console, they have to start thinking about bus structure a little bit, because those particular consoles can only do 5.1. They can't do 5.1.4. Now, the next generation, if they see that console, their job just got that much easier, but they're not going to see those consoles too quickly. So they're on the older console, and they're in an environment where the maximum size of a fader, the most number of stems, is 6, but they're transmitting 10 channels of PCM audio. Mm-hmm. Well, how do I do that? So it's about the bus structure and how you have to double things up. You have to take 2 main outputs and combine them to make 10 stems of audio. We teach them, number one, the most basic way to do that. And then we set up groups so that we can say, okay, here is the what we call down effects. So here's the down effects, or all the microphones that are on the field of play. Well, the up effects is where you would place your 4 shotguns that are up high, or in the case of like basketball, aimed at the ceiling, or in golf, aimed at the sky. You place those in a different group, and then you only send that group to the main that is the 4 channels. It sounds complicated, it really does, but it's really not. You do have to be cautious of resources. Consoles don't have an unlimited amount of DSP, so you have to be very aware of how much DSP you're using up. You could get yourself into a little trouble if you're not careful enough. We've all talked about the smaller versions of the consoles where the minimum things, and we have to make some compromises. We can't have as many faders for all 10 tape machines, all being 10 channels. You have to say, okay, you're limited. If you want to play back in Atmos, you're limited to this machine and that machine. And that's it.
What do you say to mixers who might be a little reluctant to give Dolby Atmos a try? How do you kind of get them across that line?
Asking them, how many sound bars do they think are being sold in the US and being used right now? Because everyone is starting to put that in, not because of the work that they have done.
Right.
It's because they're watching Apple, they're watching Netflix, they're watching Disney, and those are all in 5.1 or better.
Yeah, and now that capability is there.
Correct. So there's no reason why they shouldn't be trying to be equal, because the tools are there. They just have to learn them. And it's not hard. It is making a Dolby Live mix, or an Atmos mix for a sport is not hard. Yeah. It is not hard at all.
Many thanks once again to Glenn for joining us on the podcast today. I learned so much from this conversation, and I hope you did too. If you'd like to learn more about how artists use technology to tell their stories, please be sure you're subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube and our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our camera operator for this episode is Yvonne Naras. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.